The following film is based on the case files of medical examiners throughout the country. These are the stories behind some of their most provocative cases. On May 27, 1984, in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, a fisherman came upon an old cardboard box that was partially opened. What he found inside would have turned anyone's stomach.
It was a torso. It was missing its head, its arms, and its legs. The legs were sawed off around the knees. The arms were sawed off the shoulders. The head was sawed off at its connection point with the trunk of the body.
Because the body could not be identified, and there was no obvious way of knowing how this woman had been killed, the torso was wrapped in a plastic bag and placed in a freezer. After 8 months, police posted a notice in the local paper announcing that authorities had decided to bury the still unidentified torso. It was then that a woman came to the police station asking for more information about the body. An autopsy photograph was shown to her. Details like birthmarks and a surgical scar convinced her that she had found her missing sister-in-law, an attractive 34-year-old woman named Edna Posey. Edna had been a woman plagued with alcohol problems. When she became suicidal, she decided to admit herself into a mental institution. Concerned about the welfare of her 12-year-old son, Randy, she decided to make his scout leader, Donald Ruby, his legal guardian.
Donald Ruby was married. They had no children. And because of incidents in his life when he was a child, he decided that he should try to help young boys. And so his troop was comprised largely of boys from that kind of background.
After a year, Edna left the hospital and came to see the Rubys to visit her son. The couple invited her to sleep over. 2 days later, she was found gruesomely murdered. When detectives interviewed Randy, he said things that seemed to implicate Ruby in his mother's murder.
Sometime in the early morning hours, he recalls being awakened by what he described as a bump in the house that was sufficient to awaken him. He looked at the couch across the room from where he was sleeping, where his mother had been sleeping, and did not see her. It was offered that that bump was the killing of Edna Posey by Donald Ruby.
At Ruby's trial, an FBI agent, in an attempt to establish a motive, offered a so-called profile of Boy Scout leaders that strongly implied that many of them were pedophiles. Randy, after spending hours with the police, seemed to support that thesis.
There were 2 occasions on which he was wrestling with Donald Ruby, and that he believed that at the time Donald Ruby had an erection during the wrestling matches. And that was offered as evidence of proof that Donald Ruby had some sexual interest in the boy.
Even though Ruby denied the accusation, and boys from his scout troop testified that Ruby had never acted improperly toward them in any way, the FBI profile had such a powerful effect on the jury that they quickly found Donald Ruby guilty of murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison. For 6 years, Ruby, a model prisoner, sat in his cell at Huntingdon State Prison. He continued to quietly protest his innocence and hoped that his appeal for a new trial would be heard. Finally, in 1992, 3 Superior Court judges ruled that the profiling testimony was prejudicial and not scientifically reliable, and granted Donald Ruby a new trial. At Ruby's second trial, Randy, now 21 years old, did not testify to the wrestling incident or about the bump in the night.
In the intervening years, Randy grew to adulthood, and his recollections were more consistent with Donald Ruby's recollections at the time of the second trial than they were at the first trial.
What we set out to do was to convince the jury in the second trial that although this man had been convicted and sent to prison for life, there was things that first jury had not heard that made all the difference in the world.
When Ruby's lawyers examined the evidence from his first trial, they made an astounding discovery.
While viewing in a laboratory what was supposed to be dried debris in a little petri dish, it was something that looked very much like maggots.
They were not maggots, but actually maggot eggs that had been saved from Edna Posey's autopsy over 6 years before. These tiny unborn flies would now establish Edna Posey's time of death. Forensic entomologists know that a dead body, like Edna Posey, attracts blowflies within minutes. Soon, the body is crawling with hundreds of females who lay tens of thousands of eggs like a paste around open wounds. Their eggs hatch 12 to 15 hours later. As the squirming maggots feed, they secrete chemicals and enable them to consume a body, like this pig, in just a few days. In the third stage, the larvae shrink and harden, and then finally hatch into adult flies. After an exposed corpse is discovered, forensic entomologists collect samples of the maggots and count back through the 3 stages of the fly's life cycle. They use this process to pinpoint time of death within hours.
In this case, it is important to keep in mind that only unhatched eggs were found. There were no maggots even in their earliest stage. If the body had been exposed in this intense heat, there is no question that the eggs would have been laid, flies would have had access to the body, and larvae, maggot forms, would have evolved.
There was other evidence that confirmed the maggot findings. The box containing the torso had rolled down the hill, clearing a path through the plants covered with dew. No further dew had a chance to form. This was another clear indication that the murder had happened early that morning. This meant whoever killed and dismembered Edna Posey placed her mutilated body on the site just a few hours before the body was found. Ruby could not have killed her because he was at home with his wife more than an hour and a half away from the crime scene. Finally, intact sperm from 3 different men had been found in Edna Posey's body. The DNA from the sperm did not match Ruby's DNA. The jury believed the maggot evidence and the testimony from the forensic experts and found Donald Ruby innocent. After 6 years in prison, Donald Ruby was now a free man. Although his health had deteriorated in prison, and he was completely penniless, he remained optimistic about his future.
Never give up. Never forget. Love does bring peace to everyone. I believe that more today than I ever did.